So today we have Dr. Meghan Barnes, who is an assistant professor in English, and her focus is English education. So we'll be talking with Meghan a little today about what you've been doing professionally and personally during this pandemic. So I wondered if you might want to talk a bit about some of the, I don't know, did you publish like 1,000 articles this summer? Is that what it
No, I
was?
wish.
So I don't know if you could tell us a little bit about the work you're doing in them, because I know, yeah, just tell us a little bit about
Sure.
that.
Sure. So I don't know about most people during the pandemic, but it started and I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to get so much writing done because I thought it would just be a 2-week thing. And then slowly I learned it was going to be longer and I got slower with my work pace. But so I did have a couple papers come out this summer, and they're kind of in the vein of the work that I've been doing, that I started doing during my PhD. And you're right, I research English education, and specifically I look at the role that communities play in how we prepare people to teach, which, 2020 is another great year for researching that, unfortunately or fortunately, because our communities do play a big role in what happens in schools. And so I really started looking, one of the papers that came out this summer was really focused on this term community that tends to be thrown around a lot, especially in teacher education. The research on community seems to jump past what the term means to immediately focus on how can we involve communities and how we prepare people to teach. And so I started thinking about that and just trying to think for myself, how would I define this term community? And started reading and just found across the literature in and out of, teacher education worlds, that this term gets taken up in so many different ways. So I started tracing it back and really thinking about, where did community come from, and found that it's really been used as a tool for organizing people. And in some organizations, that's great. So thinking about like the civil rights movement, the way that we organized communities during that movement was so powerful and so positive to make, change and a more just society. But then we also can look at, Hitler's Germany in the 1930s and think about how community was used there to really draw very harsh lines about who is a member of a community and who's not. And then to get rid of those who are not in the community that he, privileged. So community doesn't have this beautiful, rosy history. And it certainly shouldn't be taken up in education spaces as this, positive, warm and fuzzy thing, when it really is a pretty contested term and experience for people. So anyways, that's a little background on community. And so I started thinking about how community is taken up in teacher education, and found that there are kind of 3 problematic things that happen when we just throw pre-service teachers into community spaces to do volunteer work or tutoring, some of these more charitable activities that are really common in teacher ed. One is that we end up reinforcing these deficit perspectives of others. So we have pre-service teachers who go into communities to do volunteer work. They have kind of deficit preconceptions about that population, and all that volunteer work does is reinforce that idea that they already had. Another is that it just stresses our pre-service teachers out because they don't know. So for example, if they do tutoring is great. It's one-on-one or a small group and a teacher. It's not realistic to what happens in an actual classroom. So then when that person goes into a classroom, they don't know what to do because they have 32 students instead of 1 to 3.
Yeah.
And then the final one is that it reinforces these kind of idealistic perspectives of what teaching looks like. Sorry, I have a golden retriever here who is always demanding attention. So apologies. But these idealistic perspectives of what communities are and what their role will be as teachers. Anyways, long-winded way of saying, I started working with a co-researcher who is in Arizona, and he and I started talking about, how do we do this community engaged work in teacher ed and not fall into all these traps, and recognize that community is messy, and it's not always a positive. So he and I developed a project where we have our pre-service teachers really spend time in community spaces, in very specific community spaces, learning as much as they can about that space and what it has to offer to them as a teacher and as a community member, as a community outsider, what those spaces can offer to students and to other teachers in the schools nearby. And what we have been finding is that we need to spend a lot more time on this spending time in the communities aspect, and preparing our pre-service teachers to go into communities, rather than just throwing them in and having them do volunteer work. So the kind of, I guess, the trajectory of my research and where we're moving to next is how we can start to treat communities as texts, and spaces and places as texts that can be analyzed in the ways that we analyze, the written word and young adult novels and things like that in the classroom. So how can we really support pre-service teachers in analyzing issues of representation and access in different spaces, and considering, issues of justice and equity in those spaces before we send them out to do their own community engaged work as part of their pre-service preparation.
Yeah. I wonder, this pandemic period has really reconfigured what those communities look like, and then all the issues related to access to the materials and then equity. And do you have plans to follow up and think about this particular moment and how it reflects those questions differently?
Yeah, this, it creates a lot of challenges for us. And I think one of those is back to that question about what is community? Is it a physical space? Is an action? What does it entail? And so one of the things that we're really starting to think about is all of the oversight, the administrative oversight over teachers. And that's something we've seen really increase during the pandemic. Largely and historically, there is a distrust of teachers, and a lack of trust for them to do their job if not being seen by an administrator. And so I think
panoptic. It's like,
yes, it is the panopticon. It definitely is. So I think there's this fear among administrators, especially, and lawmakers, that because they can't see teachers necessarily doing their job in the classroom, that they may not be doing it. And so we're seeing across the country an increase in testing in a lot of places to try to build in that accountability for teachers. So the question then becomes, what are really effective teachers doing, and for lack of a better word, to subvert that system? So even though, they're relegated potentially to remote learning, there's an increase in this administrative oversight, an increase in standardized testing. What are really effective teachers doing to still know their individual students, the communities that they come from, the resources that are there, that they can build into the ways that they're teaching? There are teachers doing this work. And so those are the ones that we're really wanting to partner with moving forward. The challenge is that those are usually our more veteran teachers who are not fearful of losing a job. They feel fairly solid in their workplace. And that's the challenge when you're working with pre-service teachers, who are going to be our most vulnerable teacher population.
And it's a problem that all teachers, I'm sure that whether it's K through 12 or higher ed, are thinking about and being faced with right now, is that on the one hand, everyone's being asked to become innovators.
Yes.
Which means taking risks and trying something that you may not be comfortable doing. And then at the same time, if that's coupled with increased oversight and the sense of punitive oversight,
yes.
So that if you're testing, if you're not meeting thresholds, then you're not doing it right, is sort of this disjunct that is very unsettling at a time that's unsettling already.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Wow. It'll be really interesting to see then what you guys work up after. So since you've been already publishing on this before the pandemic, and see what it looks like after. You have a different cross section of things to look at.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think it helps that there are some aspects of the digital world that really help us to build community,
Mm-hmm.
and help us build connections across spaces. So for example, my colleague in Arizona, he has such a different population of pre-service
Oh,
teachers and schools than we do here.
yeah.
And, technology is a great resource for us. It helps us really build that connection. So our pre-service teachers have an understanding of, what a very different community looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to look at it from a positive perspective
Right.
is helpful,
Yeah.
but it definitely does present new challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, any innovation, right? It's
Yeah,
about opportunity as well as the challenge. But
exactly.
half full or half empty, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, so you want to talk a little bit about how you've been managing this pandemic personally? Like, what have you been doing with your time when you're not thinking about those other things?
Well, I think I started by, I had never read the Harry Potter series, which as a former middle school teacher, I feel like is a sin to admit. And so when this started, I was like, I'm going to read the Harry Potter series. So I've just finished all 7 books.
Nice.
That felt like a huge accomplishment. But I think the bigger thing that I haven't shared as widely is that my husband and I are expecting a baby in October. So we have been very busily trying to learn what it means to be a parent. We have no experience with babysitting or childcare of any kind.
You don't need
So,
that. They're sort of self-explanatory.
oh, that's what I'm hoping. My sister had a baby a month ago, and she's the same as me. Neither of us were babysitters. We were never really big into small children, and she's doing a great job. So I'm like, if she can do it, we will be fine.
All you need to know was in the Harry Potter series. You're fine.
I know, and I'm already excited about rereading them to the baby because you get to the end of the 7th book, and I've just spent so much time with Harry now in 2020. I just find myself missing what he's doing. But it'll be a good excuse to reread.
So do you have the crib set up? Is the baby
Yes.
set up?
Yes, I think I've really come to understand the nesting instinct. I think coupled with spending so much time in your home during a pandemic, and the ease of ordering things from Amazon,
Right.
we have a nursery that is, very well set up, more so than it would have been otherwise. It would have been very last minute had there not been a pandemic.
Now is everything perfectly ordered and cleaned and all of that? Because first of all, the baby's not here yet, and second, you've had extra time at home.
I know it is feeling very, very organized. I think I realized I was hitting I needed to pull back the reins a little bit when I bought a label maker last week and started labeling everything in the house. So now I'm trying to really tamp that down. But it's the most organized.
Until the label maker comes out, and then it's time to close that all down.
That's exactly right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's a different thing to have a baby during a pandemic too.
It is. It's been hard because for the first few months, my husband couldn't go with me to the doctor's appointments, which was disappointing for him not to be able to be there. And then just all the unknowns of COVID, just the different information we've received throughout the whole thing. So it hasn't been the greatest probably pregnancy experience, but there have been some perks. I've been able to be home and sleep in a little bit more than I probably normally would have been. So
that's not
I'll
bad.
take it. Yeah. Yeah.
It's your situation, I think, reflects so well what is maybe one of the positive ways to think about this pandemic time, which is, just to travel through it with as much grace and optimism as we can. And you just keep going and good things still come out of it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. That's the only way to look at it at this point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been awesome talking to you, and
Thanks,
congratulations.
Jen.
So anybody who didn't know now knows, and we'll send a formal announcement once baby Barnes arrives.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
one, right? It's not more than
Just
one?
one. It is
Okay.
only one. Yeah. It will have two last names because I kept my last name and
Okay.
Kevin's last name is Sweat. So this poor
Oh,
child's going to have four names when it's born, but
all right. Well, that works
yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Well, but it's been nice talking to you.
Thanks,
And
Jen.
good luck with everything in these last weeks.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. I'm